I know that the economy has gone to crap recently, but I don't know, maybe you'll get a discount on one of these places because they're pure evil.
Yeah. You said it. Let's dive right in.
Let's get into it.
Hamilton Palace has stood abandoned for over 2 decades and was never finished. It's also bigger than Buckingham Palace. Hamilton Palace has quite the story behind it. It's a massive mansion that was designed for a guy named Nicholas Van Hoogstraten. He's a big-time businessman and convicted criminal. Back in 2000, things hit a bit of a snag in the project. Van Hoogstraten had a falling out with his architect, and the mansion project was derailed. And since then, it's just been sitting there unfinished. People even started calling it the Ghost House of Sussex, because apparently it was a little haunted. But if you're curious about what's inside, good luck getting close. The place is surrounded by thick trees and there are signs warning you to stay away. The place is apparently also surrounded by cameras and rabid dogs, so not exactly welcoming. Some locals thought the mansion could be used to help the homeless, but Van Hoogstraten, who was first jailed in 1968 for enlisting a couple of his underlings to hurl a grenade at the home of a former business associate, well, he just shot that idea down. He does not think much of homeless folks, apparently, saying that they're just lazy and a drain on society. He also insisted that the project has not been abandoned and will eventually be completed. As of now, though, Hamilton Palace remains totally empty.
Next up, we've got Lennox Castle, built in Scotland in 1812 for John Lennox, who belonged to a prominent Scottish family. Fast forward to the 1930s, and the castle has been converted into an asylum for the mentally ill, where patients were often brutalized by hospital staff. Beatings, starvings, and restraints were common practice, which kind of makes sense when you take into consideration the fact that fewer than half of the members of staff were actually trained nurses. It was also incredibly overcrowded and filthy. During World War II, the castle was also used as a hospital, and so patients suffering from mental illnesses were forcibly removed from the main building and crammed into other overcrowded buildings on the property. Patients became agitated and fights began to break out on a regular basis. And then one day a riot happened, during which many patients and many members of staff fled the grounds. The rioters, however, were locked inside of the castle, where they caused significant damage to the interior, themselves, and their fellow imprisoned patients. Countless people died on the property, likely due to fights, violent acts, and various illnesses, and they were all buried in unmarked graves on the grounds. The asylum/hospital finally closed its doors in 2002 and has sat abandoned ever since, although there have been talks about having it converted into a condo building. So James, if you're on the market, I've got just the place for you.
Hacienda Napoles now operates as a jungle-themed amusement park, but the property used to belong to a small-time criminal who I'm sure none of you have heard of before, Pablo Escobar. Yeah, nuts. Imagine enjoying a fun afternoon in the sun with your family on property where one of the most notorious cartel leaders in history once lived. Hacienda Napoles in Colombia has a wild history. Back in the day, it belonged to the big boss of the Medellin cartel, Pablo Escobar. He put it together in the 70s, and it was really something else. Remember the like push it to the limit montage in Scarface, where Tony Montana starts making it rich? He's buying all this wild stuff for his mansion. Well, this place makes Scarface's mansion look like a basement apartment. The place was huge, a massive estate with a mansion, a zoo, yes, a full zoo, a bull ring, a soccer field, and even a private airstrip. Tony Montana just had a tiger. The zoo on Escobar's property was packed with exotic animals, elephants, giraffes, hippos, and lions. But when he met his end in 1993, the government swooped in and took over the estate, and it fell into disrepair real quick. The animals either got moved, killed, or they ran off into the wild. The mansion got looted and trashed, and the airstrip was demolished. Most of the buildings got torn down over time as well, but a few are still standing.
Next on our list today, we have Elda Castle, built in Ossington, New York in the 1920s by David T. Abercrombie. If that name sounds familiar, it's probably because David Abercrombie was the co-founder of Abercrombie & Fitch, a clothing company started in 1892. David moved into the mansion while it was still under construction with his wife, Lucy Kate, and their 4 children, Elizabeth, Lucy Jr., David Jr., and Abbott. Life was good until the construction of the mansion was completed in 1928, and misfortune befell the family. Lucy Jr. died in an accident at her father's factory, and then David Sr., the Abercrombie founder, died in his home of an intense fever. After that, the house was abandoned by the family. Since then, several different owners have attempted to fix up the abandoned and decaying mansion, but have abandoned the project, I'm saying abandoned a lot, completely after encountering extremely bad luck, many of them having attributed to the home itself, which I'm now thinking is probably definitely cursed.
Chateau Miranda has now been demolished, but it stood abandoned for decades and it was rumored to be haunted. It was built back in 1866 in Belgium. The family needed a safe spot during the French Revolution, so they set up this massive castle. The place was kinda like the castle from Beauty and the Beast. It had 500 rooms, 500, plus a tall tower, a chapel, a library, and a ballroom. Later on, during World War II, it became an orphanage and a hospital, and that's where the darkness comes in, because were orphanages back in the day ever good places? And obviously hospitals, people die all the time. After the war though, the family left it behind, and with nobody taking care of it, the castle started falling apart. People even said it was haunted by ghosts of the orphans and soldiers who had been housed there. By 2017, it was in such bad shape that the owners decided to tear it down.
Next on our list today we have Villa de Vecchi. You should probably be able to guess where it's located based off the name alone, but if you can't, no worries, because I will tell you now. Villa de Vecchi is a beautiful, creepy, abandoned mansion located near Lake Como in Italy, which is stunning, by the way. Construction of the house, now nicknamed the House of Witches, started in 1854 and lasted until 1875, when the house was finally complete. It was built as a summer home, as most houses in Lake Como are, for Count Felix de Vecchi, but of course when they moved in, their good luck moved out, and so did the luck of the contractor apparently, who died just a year after the house was built. Now back to the Count. In 1862, after a day out on the lake, Count de Vecchi returned home to his summer mansion to find his wife dead and his daughter missing. He searched for a year, but eventually gave up trying and took his own life inside of the mansion. After the Count's death, his brother moved into the mansion, but abandoned it in the 1960s, and in 2002, an avalanche came that wiped out all of the houses in the area. Except, you guessed it, Villa de Vecchi, which stands tall to this day, super creepy, and probably cursed.
There is a cottage in the village of St. Osyth, which is said to be one of the most haunted homes in England. It's referred to as the Cage, because it used to be a small jail up until 1908. But there's an even darker history to the building. All the way back in 1582, 13 witches were held there while awaiting trial, one of which was Ursula Kemp, who is a pretty infamous supposed witch. She actually admitted to intentionally causing harm to some of her neighbors. She was a folk healer who locals would often come to for help with various ailments. So apparently this place is almost unlivable because of all the paranormal activity. One owner, who moved out of the place in 2004, claimed she'd experienced violent activity, objects being thrown at her, doors slamming. She would see this shadowy demonic figure resembling a goat that would growl. Apparently one time it even spanked her. She even said she was pushed by some unseen force while pregnant. So yeah, it was time to move.
Next up, we have the Los Feliz Killing House, located in Los Feliz, Los Angeles. The mansion is the former home of Dr. Harold Perelson, his wife, their son Joel, and their two daughters, Judy and Debbie. Life was good for the Perelsons until it wasn't. And it really wasn't on December 6th of 1959, when Dr. Harold decided to take the lives of all four members of his family. In the middle of the night, the doctor took a ball-peen hammer to his wife's head and killed her in her sleep, before moving on to Joel, Judy, and Debbie, who were luckily able to escape before meeting the same fate as their mother. After the ordeal, Dr. Harold killed himself by drinking a bottle of acid. Police believe that the doctor had snapped after being screwed out of the rights of his invention of a new kind of syringe, which is really no excuse, but it's what they believe happened. After the incident, the house went on the market and it was purchased by the Enriquez family, who used it as a storage unit up until 2016, when they sold it to a young couple who apparently couldn't stomach the vibe of the place, because just a short while after they purchased the home, it went back on the market, where it remains sitting empty, creepy to this day.
If you're from the US or Canada, you don't really need to travel all the way to Europe to see a castle. Right in upstate New York is an abandoned Gothic style castle that was built by a man named Ralph Wards Dundas. Construction started in 1915, but Dundas died in 1921 before the castle had been completed, and more tragedy followed. Dundas had been building the castle for his family, but his wife had been mentally unwell for some time, and with the death of her husband, her mental state just continued to deteriorate. She only lived in the massive home with her daughter for a short time before being taken to an asylum. The daughter was now incredibly wealthy though, but not for long. The caretakers of the castle, who were meant to be looking after her, ended up robbing her blind. She ended up moving to England, but just like her mother, her mental state began to decline and she was whisked away to an asylum as well.
And finally, we have the John List House, built in 1893 in New Jersey. Now, fast forward to November of 1971, John List, a former military man, is living in the mansion with his mother, his wife Helen, who had been suffering from syphilis at the time, their daughter Patricia, and their sons Frederick and John Jr. And one day, he just snaps. While Patricia, Frederick, and John Jr. were out of the house, John Sr. grabbed a semi-automatic handheld weapon and fired a projectile into the back of his wife's head. He then fired another projectile into his mother's forehead. Both died pretty much instantly. When Patricia and Frederick arrived home, he fired a projectile into the back of both of their heads, killing them as well, before heading over to the kitchen to make himself some lunch. After his stomach was full, he drove away from the home to pick up his third child, John Jr., from a soccer game. He picked him up, took him home, and you guessed it, he fired a projectile into the back of John Jr.'s head, killing him. He then dragged the bodies of his wife, daughter, and 2 sons into the mansion's ballroom and stuffed them into sleeping bags. He left his mother's body in the attic apartment, and then he cleaned up the crime scene, removed his face from all of the family photos, and skipped town, and got married to someone new. But in 1989 he was arrested for his crimes, and in 1990 he finally confessed. Now, prior to John's arrest, the mansion had actually burned down due to suspected arson, but a new, almost identical mansion was rebuilt in its place on the abandoned and haunted grounds of the place that once played host to the gruesome killing of the entire List family, minus John, of course.
Second time. Scared Hannah twice today. I think that's a good place to end it. I've been your host, James.
Delayed reaction too. I've been your host, Hannah.
We'll catch you in the next one.
Cheers.
I would totally live in a haunted mansion for a discount. That's like, oh man, I'd pay extra to live in a haunted mansion. Jeez.
During World War II, the hospital was also, what am I saying? The castle was also used as a hospital for mental patients suffering from mental. Okay. Wild. Bad goat. Their daughter Patricia and their sons Frederick, oh my god, just scared the